when we think about value for our artists, um, we understand the trajectory and we're having conversations around value, not just as the galleries, but also with the artists, right? People are actually really surprised at the prices of this work, right? And so for people that would not necessarily be buying art, is for us to gain their attention and say, like, art is affordable and you can start with really young artists. That's sort of the model we've been using for a while now.
You're listening to Frontier Matters, the podcast from 1914 Reader. Join us as we dive into bold conversations on growth and change in the frontier economies of the world.
Believe it or not, our guest today began her career as an accountant after earning a degree from Howard University. She then went on to work with PwC before leaving all of that to pursue something that did not really exist at the time, an art ecosystem for young African artists with global ambitions but local roots. In Lagos, she founded a gallery and a foundation whose name literally means coming home, creating a pipeline through programs like Young Contemporaries that has now mentored and exhibited dozens of emerging artists across Africa. She went on to lead Nigeria's first national pavilion at the Venice Biennale, then extended her experiment from Lagos to Los Angeles and then London, making her gallery the first from the African continent to open in LA and one of the few to claim real footing on 3 continents at once. She has since been recognized by Apollo, Vogue magazine, and New African magazines as among the most influential voices shaping culture today. She's part of a generation of African gallerists quietly redrawing the map of the global art world. Adenrele Sonariwo, welcome to Frontier Matters.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be doing this.
Let me get right into it. So I want to start with Nigeria, right? So for someone like me, I only really began to notice Nigerian art sometime in the last decade. It feels like we've entered a distinct era right now, as if something sparked and then shifted the whole landscape, and we're in a kind of, the Europeans will have a name for a time period where they call the Renaissance, all those kind of stuff. So from your vantage point at the forefront of that shift, whatever it is that happened in the last 10, 15 years, what would you call this era of Nigerian art? When would you say it really began, and what do you think ignited it?
So as far as like creating that terminology, I think that I'd leave that to the historians to figure out what that terminology would be. But what I think with the last 10 years that I started 10 years ago with a physical space. But before that, like 5 years prior, I'd still been doing like creative programming. But as I celebrate 10 years, I'm also quite like seeing a lot of other activities that are also celebrating 10 years. So whether it's in music or fashion or, the likes. So I think that sort of emergence or awakening that we're seeing is a result of different things. I would say for me, it was having been out of the country for a while and then coming back and spending time within the creative space and then seeing young artists and seeing how talented they were and sort of trying to figure out how I could contribute to bringing their work, their talent to a wider audience, right? And so that was what I was seeing then. Eventually then creating structure around the gallery that came afterwards, right? That came 10 years ago. But I think a lot of my path is mirrored in the way like some of the other people that I've seen. It's like you want to see yourself within the space. There's now a sort of mix of identity, right? Because you've gone out of the country, you've come back, and there's a struggle with like culture, there's a struggle with the way you're thinking. At the time when I was going around to see art exhibitions, I wasn't seeing myself reflected in these spaces. And so for people that didn't even go abroad, it's like you're paying more attention to like social media. Like there's this digital connection that is happening that can be inspiring and that can influence, the way you see things. So being able to sort of bridge that world, I think, and seeing myself and other young people being reflected within the art space is what I think for me and for a lot of the other people that started around the same time.
So, full disclosure, I'm a bit of it, not even a bit, all the way, an art novice. So you permit my
You like your kind.
you permit my pedestrian questions. So, but what I would ask is, if you had to freeze frame this moment in the Nigerian and contemporary African art, What would that picture look like? Describe it for us briefly.
If I had to freeze time,
If you have to freeze
So
frame it,
crazy.
what does it look like if you stop this moment, the last 10 years for you and where you are right now?
yeah,
If you had to,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, it looks like progress. It looks like a lot of energy. It feels very vibrant. It feels very relevant. It feels empowering as well. A lot of the artists, we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of artists. So we work from like a very sort of early stage in their career where nobody even knows who they are to seeing them sort of become who they are now and seeing what it means to give someone the tools and the resources they need to develop. Obviously, there's that part where you also have to be passionate and you have to have that self-determination, right? But there's also a place for giving someone resources and the tools. So, I mean, I see just progress. I see empowerment and I see beauty as well because we're talking about art here.
So I saw one of your old interviews. You said something like Rele was born from seeing young artists in Lagos with no platform. From the question, how do we make art accessible? So I think what I want to try and find out is what were you really pushing against in the Nigerian arts system at that time? So basically, like, I imagine that there was sort of like an obstacle or there was a closed door or something, and that had to be pushed through to make that art more accessible. So in that sense, what was stopping those things you wanted to achieve from happening at the time? What were the obstacles in the way back then?
You want to get me in trouble?
We could take the diplomatic answer.
Yes. I think that the first thing is, and that's why I don't really like doing these interviews because you have to be diplomatic. Um, Again, when I first started, I wasn't so much trying to investigate why. I really was just trying to solve the problem. And I think that that's the way I approach everything I embark on, right? And I think the ignorance of not knowing what the problem is also useful in some way. It's what helped me with Venice. It's also what helped me with starting then. I think there was a lot of gatekeeping happening from older artists. There was some sort of gatekeeping mechanism. I don't know the full details of it, but I've heard a bit from some of these young artists. And so it wasn't until like years later that I figured out that some of those people didn't even like me, right? Just because you're creating this access that they would otherwise be required to, do certain things to gain that access, right? And then this is someone that is just coming and giving them that access. I think that could have been one of the problems amongst others. But as I said, I was just trying to solve the problem and say, I'm not saying young artists, I'm not saying female artists. How can I help? What can I bring to the table that is different?
So being an outsider helped in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, most art ecosystems fail because they lack institutions that create stability for artists. So when you think about your role today, what part of the cultural infrastructure, whether in Nigeria or even with artists from emerging countries in the West, do you believe you are actively building? If you could wave a wand and create one thing that you think is missing, something that neither the private market or public institutions has yet built, what would that single thing be, which would be really transformative?
To be honest, the institutions, the players in Nigeria especially, we've had to sort of create our own structures to fit the market. Primarily, people consider me a gallerist, right? But the work I do is beyond being a gallerist. I've had to start my own foundation because I saw a gap, right? And I think there needs to be a lot of flexibility in the way you sort of approach the space now. It's not a one size fits all. So the same way a gallery run somewhere in New York is not the same approach I took because I realized that to be successful, I had to play other sort of roles, right? And that was where my foundation came in terms of like being able to do what we do with foundation. But it wasn't always easy trying to build that structure when you think about the foundation. Like we struggled, a lot of the way in which we were able to raise money for the foundation was through the gallery structure. So we had the gallery feeding into the foundation, almost like we're pouring all our profits back into the foundation because we know that we wanted to support the artists and all that. And so if I was supposed to build something, it would be that each institution is playing their role. The museums are playing their role. Like museums are supposed to be the highest validation for an artist. And so when we think about the museum structure in Nigeria, it's like, can we have it be that validation for the artist, whether it's a private museum or it's run by government? Can it be standardized, and can it be at a level where we begin to build that validation internally as opposed to seeking it from an external institution? So that would be one. And that also then frees up the gallerists, or the artists to play their role as well. I mean, now we're at a time where we're seeing a lot more galleries, meaning that the artists can begin to have proper representation. At the time I started, there weren't any real galleries that are representing artists. I'm not even sure that there's a lot of them representing, but we are very big on representation, and that is like having to play different roles. And then also that the arts foundations actually had the funding to create stability for artists, to give them grants, to give them studio spaces, So there's so many different, we have so many problems.
Like anything else in Nigeria, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the bit about museums as the final validation, I thought that's really interesting. Definitely a missing gap. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about Young Contemporaries. So it's now 10 years old, and you have alumni showing internationally. Now, if you were to look at that pipeline, what's the biggest thing that you think, and I'm inviting you to blow your own trumpet here. Just imagine, say, a 23-year-old Nigerian artist 10 years ago, so 2015, and a 23-year-old Nigerian artist this year, 2025, what is the biggest difference in terms of what access they have, or what can something like Young Contemporaries do for them today that was not available, say, 10 years ago?
I think what Young Contemporary did was to just really give the young artists the confidence, confidence in their work and confidence in their talent and their ability to really be artists. And I mean like full-time artists. So you're not like doing art as a side gig. Like your art can take care of you, take care of your family, At one point, we did a sort of analysis of the program and how many of those artists are still, because like any other thing, you have some artists that are no longer creating, and I think we're at about 94%, right? And that was pretty validating for us because we want to give the artists, the right tools. We also want the collectors to feel confident that they're supporting artists that have a great trajectory ahead of them, right? And so when we have that sort of statistics to show that, most of the artists that we've brought on this platform, they're still creating, they're still taking their art seriously, it means a lot, right? And so the program, I always say it's the most important thing I get to do every year. It's me just spending time inviting other guests, professionals from all around Africa to just come and be a part of this molding, so to say, of the next generation of African artists, and seeing them, I mean, beyond the international shows, some of them have gone back to like graduate schools abroad. Beyond that, I think one of the most interesting things when we did our 10-year anniversary, and some of them had a chance to speak to our guests, it's really where they started from. Not even having studio space, but being able to like any profession, being able to like do it in such a way that you can now see this is my job, this is my full-time job. Some of them are like even the main income earners in their house, There's just so much good, great stories that have come out of the program that always gets us excited to want to keep doing it.
Sorry, so silly question. Have you had non-Nigerians in Young Contemporaries? I've never asked this before.
Absolutely. I think it was in about the 6th or 7th year.
Okay.
We decided to expand it. Actually, a 5th year. We wanted to expand it. So we invited artists from other countries. Like we've had Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, yes, Cameroon, Kenya.
It seems to be the case that a lot of early career support, so this is sort of like a follow-on from the last one, but it seems to be the case a lot of early career support globally for an artist is now tied to things like residencies, prizes, and foundations. What do you think foundations in Africa need to do differently so that they're not just mimicking European models? Obviously, these things are still being built in Africa, and we have a chance to shape or do things slightly differently. What do you think should be done differently for these things in?
You have to sort of just adapt to the space, like adapt to the environment that you're in terms of like you go into a space, what do the artists need the most in that space, right? Is it materials? Is it where to live? Is it studio space? So you're not coming and you're not copying and pasting. You're actually meeting the needs of what the artist in that space looks like. When I do get invited to some of this country, the first thing I do is just go to the galleries and to just see what the art space looks like. I don't want to call any countries. But some of these countries, you can tell like the difference in what is needed. So from one country, for instance, it's that they need to build infrastructure around art education. These artists need to be more exposed, for instance. For some other countries, it's like there are no galleries, So it really depends on the environment. And so I think as people begin to think about how they can contribute to the space, it's like, can we just ensure that we're meeting the needs of the environment versus just picking an idea and copying and pasting? And I think that happens also when you spend time within the space. And so for me, I knew very early on what I wanted to contribute to the space because I had worked in this space for about 5 years prior and I had seen some of the gaps. So it's seeing the gaps, and I always say we're always responding. We respond to the needs of our artists, we respond to the environment, That really is our way of sort of staying alive.
I want to ask you now to share a specific young contemporary alumnus. So, you can do it without naming it, but I basically want to get a sense of one alumnus or maybe even more, or a trajectory that captures what's possible when local infrastructure and global attention actually kind of like line up. If you don't want to name names, that's fine. But basically, what is the ideal trajectory for an artist from Nigeria to the world? And what does it look like? Just in a kind of overview.
Yeah, I try to refrain from talking about specific artists because I've been accused of having favorites. So I like to sort of say all of them. Trajectory is different from artist to artist. I'll give a couple of examples. So what we do is we would usually start off with an open call. It's Pan-African. We leverage our relationships with like other arts institutions and arts professionals from different African countries to just help us to push out the open call. And so we do the open call, we get a number of applications, 500, 600 applications, we come through it, a group of people come through it. And then we do a short list of about 25 people, artists. The first shortlist is 50, the first shortlist is 25. I do have to say, I look at every single one. So I look at all 500 or all 600, despite the fact that somebody else does the shortlisting. I do that just because.
That's harder to get into than Harvard.
No, I look at it because what has happened in the past is that when they do the initial shortlist, everybody's eye is different. And so I like to just go back and make sure that we're not leaving anybody out that, has potential. And so we do that. We get 25 people and then we do like interviews with them. Also have to say here that this is not always the process, right? But we've like learned our lesson over time. Again, we're always adapting to some of the situations that occur. And so we do a phone interview with all of them on the call. You get a chance to sort of see them. And then we eventually bring between 12 to 13 to a space. We brought up to 26 before into one space. We go to Ekiti for the summer. That's where we do our residency program. We invite other professionals to come join us. They're also working actively while they're in the residency. From the residency, it's also a good opportunity for us to get to know their personalities. We always say we're looking for a combination of integrity and talent, right? And so if you have integrity or you don't have talent, or if you have talent and integrity, it doesn't really work for us. We want a combination of both. And so I think when you spend time in very intimate settings with people, you get a chance to really see that. And so from then, we have an exhibition where we also want to engage with the people locally in Ado-Ekiti. And so we invite them into come to the exhibition. We then send them back home afterwards. We changed it recently. So we send them back home. And then while they're home, we want you to continue working and then show us what you've been working on. The residency is fully paid for. We accommodate you, we feed you, everything. All you just really need to do is to focus on the work and pay attention in class. And then we send you back home. And then what we just recently started doing, as I said, is that we want you to just keep working on your own and all that. And then we eventually select the ones that we feel like, took the lessons in and have a great trajectory. It's a group of people that actually make the selection. We select them, and then in January of every year, we have an exhibition for them in Lagos where we invite people to. It's one of the exhibitions that people really look forward to within our space. So we invite them to have that exhibition, which goes on for about 6 weeks. After the exhibition, we're looking, other curators, other galleries are looking as well. So they do get approached by other galleries. We also might decide we want to continue to work with them. If we keep them, so now I'm putting, that's my foundation hat that I finished right there.
Okay.
Now, as a gallerist, I would see one of them and I'll say, oh, we want to continue working with you. And what that looks like from my standpoint is that we'll start scheduling you into shows, right? So we'll have like a group exhibition, and we can have a solo exhibition for you where it's just you. We do one in Lagos, and then we can decide we want to do another one. And this is a build up, right? Ideally, your next solo exhibition should be 2 to 3 years after. It shouldn't be rushed, right? And so we create a plan, especially based on how the artist works. We have artists that can only create 3 to 4 pieces a year. We have artists that work a bit faster. So based on the artist, we actually really have a conversation with them around the trajectory. Solo exhibitions, group exhibition. We also take them to art fairs. Also working with other galleries as well. So another gallery might have a show that, our artists can fit into, we welcome that. And so what you see is that from a very sort of like, nobody knows you, we begin to build the market for them. For an artist that another gallery is interested in, probably the same kind of trajectory. I have artists that have gone through our program that work with so many different other galleries now. Some of the galleries are abroad, some are local, so it really differs. But what is ultimately happening is that your work is being seen. And I think that's the most important thing to an artist.
You often describe Lagos as dynamic, vibrant, cultural. I think you left out the traffic, but okay. In your experience curating African art on 3 different continents, what stories do you feel the most responsibility to tell at home first? And in general, what are the nuances in creating for Lagos versus curating for, say, LA or London, even when it's the same art?
Oh, that's a great question. Lagos for us is sort of like home. It grounds the work. So you gain that sort of local audience, right? When you show work in Lagos. You know that somebody's going to show up, like when you do a show at home, And so for us, the conversation with different artists is different. Like I always say that we want to do a show at home first, because you want to sort of invite your friends, invite your family. A lot of the artists that we've worked with have gained popularity at home first. And that's safe. It's grounding. When you take it internationally, you're unsure of how people are going to take it. But I think it also allows us to put these artists in global conversations, right? And so when we do it in London or in Lagos, for instance, you get a very sort of global audience that is coming to look at the work. And so when they are really connecting with the work, then you know that you're doing something great. And so for me, I always felt like the artists in Nigeria or in the rest of Africa can stand side by side with other artists internationally. And so being able to take that work out of the country and have this sort of global conversation and feeling like people can connect with it, it's very validating for us and for the artist as well, because you do want your work to be not just a local champion, right? You want your works to be truly like global. Yeah.
Going to ask you to maybe briefly wear your accountant hat here now. So, I mean, global art markets, they often create all these speculative bubbles around, especially around emerging regions. You've witnessed African art go through hype cycles, for lack of
Wearing one right now. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think my first question would be that what are the signals that you pay attention to when distinguishing, real value from speculative excitement? So, obviously you're seeing this artist right from the start, and we've seen reports that African art sales growing over the long term, but cooling at auction recently. Do you think that this feels like a healthy correction, or are there structural risks that you're worried about? So I think the first part is obviously what are those signals that help you your mental model for saying, okay, this is a bit speculative, this is real value, and for the long term.
Okay, so there's 2 hats to wear here, right? There's the gallerist hat and there's the like thought leadership. If I was gonna act like I'm a thought leader, right, I would say something different. As a gallerist, right, when we think about value for our artists, we understand the trajectory and we're having conversations around value, not just as a gallerist, but also with the artists, right? When we do start our Young Contemporaries program, people are actually really surprised at the prices of this work, right? And so for people that would not necessarily be buying art, is for us to gain their attention and say, like, art is affordable and you can start with really young artists. That's sort of the model we've been using for a while now. It's also helpful when you support the artist. It's also helpful for the artist to know that, oh, someone is interested in buying my work. But then as you begin to build, as you begin to have the trajectory I just spoke about a couple of minutes ago, that's the group shows, the solo shows, there's a lot of building that is happening. There's a lot of change of material. There's quality that is being sort of invested into the work that it has to reflect on the prices. And then also when you now move to an international market as well, you have to consider the logistics of all that is involved in showing an artist on an international space. And so as a gallery, this is some of the different things that we look at in terms of value creation for an artist, right? And it's the discussion that happens with the artist. Now, if I put a thought leadership hat on, right, I would say that, I'm really disappointed at what is happening, especially with like African artists where the prices are dropping and all that kind of stuff, right? And yes, it was very speculative with some artists, but I think that when you're confident in your work and when you're patient, like just let it ride out. What I'm finding is that a lot of people are not patient and, you know, it's not always going to be high. You're going to have low moments. And so it's like, how do we navigate the sort of low moments? It's by just being patient and staying true to your craft and understanding that these things happen in cycles, right? I know I'm saying it and it sounds easy, but I know it's not because we're living through that cycle right now. And it's like, regardless of me living that cycle, I would not even think about dropping my artist pricing because that also sort of affects the collector base as well. It's like, okay, you can't afford it right now. That's fine. Whoever can afford it will eventually come and we'll just keep, we'll keep hustling. That's the right word. We're here for the long run.
I'm just curious, how do you balance nurturing artists' long-term practices with the short-term demands of collectors, fairs, and I mean the speculation that Feyi spoke of in the last question, especially when young artists can get hot very quickly? And also, if you could redesign one rule about how the global art market work in a way that better serve artists, especially from the continent, what would you change?
It's two questions. Now I've forgotten both questions. What was the question again?
So the first question is, how do you
Should I
balance?
with the first one?
Yeah,
When
how
I
do you
did-
balance
okay.
nurturing artists' long-term practices with the short-term
Okay.
demands
Okay.
of
I remember
you know?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, as I said, we work with artists that have integrity and talent, and a lot of the artists trust us. A lot of the artists that we work with trust us. They trust our advice. We also have a structure around just ensuring that they are good regardless of what is going on with the economy. We're not a bank, meaning that we can't give them loans or anything. We try to do our best in terms of just ensuring that they can not compromise on their integrity. The artists that we work with are very level-headed. They understand that this is what I do. This is my life. This is what I do. I'm doing for the rest of my life. They understand the ups and downs. When the going was good, it was good, So they understand it. And it's not just happening to them. It's happening just everywhere. So we're lucky that we have those artists that we work with. And so it makes our work easier. We really don't have to balance anything. It's inherent. We built it from scratch with them. Yeah.
My second question is, if you could redesign one thing about the global art market in a way that would better serve the artists, especially on the continent, what's the one thing that you would fix?
I think it's just respect for the artists. Whether you're showing them locally or internationally, it's respecting them. Like at the end of the day, if we didn't have artists and their artworks, like we wouldn't be galleries, so we wouldn't be curators. And so, there are ways in which the artists have been disrespected. There are ways in which their work hasn't been treated with care. And so that would be one thing. And this idea of being sort of like exploiting African artists, all those sort of conversations, like those are things that really sort of annoy me that I would redesign if you were me. Yeah.
So I've got a couple of questions. So I think the first one is, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about, obviously, Young Contemporaries is now 10 years old, the numbers are getting bigger in terms of the artists that have come through you. And I'm just thinking, right, obviously you are a big part of it. You're a driving force behind all of this. But as these numbers get bigger, so as you have more artists, what's your vision for how this scales, right? So, I mean, obviously you've got the foundation, which is something that will be beyond you, it's institutionalizing the work you're doing. But beyond all of that, as the numbers get bigger, and I know you do a lot of traveling, for example, when you need some rest and all of that. What's your vision for making this an institution that can bring on artists on the pipeline that way?
We want to be able to do more African countries, right? And we want to be able to even do it within their own spaces. And so my personal sort of ambition is to not just be the person that is doing it, but to have people in those cities that are doing it. So I want to be able to support art leaders, for instance, because I know that I cannot be everywhere. I cannot be everywhere at once, right? But happy to train, happy to have them be those sort of leaders in their own spaces that can train and support and find the funding necessary to be able to support these artists. But in the meanwhile, it's really for us to be able to also get our own space, figure out where we want to situate it. Because for now, we're going to do a permanent space in a certain city. But, Nigeria, not everyone is very progressive right now, so we have to be very careful about where you're doing anything. You know how you're about to say, my people going to start? Yes.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about, where we do things. And so those are some of the things we're thinking of. For now, we want to be able to take on more artists, which requires more funding for us. Because there's just so much, I think, that can still be done. But in the meanwhile, we just keep doing what we're doing.
On a personal note, and this one I'm asking for my own benefit as well.
Personal.
What did your accounting educate? I'm an accounting as well. So what did your accounting education? And maybe this might be an option for me. I don't know, sometime in future to.
No, you're already old.
Exactly.
We welcome all.
I think you've already mentioned some of it because I liked when you were talking about the young contemporaries thing. So, the way I see that is actually just basically putting a structure around people. So there's only so much structure that an artist can have. They don't wake up at 9 in the morning, and then paint from 9 to 5, and then close for the next day. That sort of thing. They are a bit more free spirit. So, but it seems like one of the things you've done is to put a structure around them. So say, okay, this can be a career, and then within that you can exist and do your thing. But what I wanted to know specifically was, what did your accounting education and training give you that has been valuable in your art career?
It gave me a lot of discipline in terms of just anybody that has worked with me knows that I don't play when it comes to money. What I mean is really about the expenses, right? Because you have high and low moments. Like you're not selling a painting every day, right? And so you have to be able to balance it. I read a lot of all this podcasts around or I listen to a lot of this podcast around business and stuff like that. And one of the important things I always take out of that is just you have to watch your expenses, right? Creatively, it's very easy for an artist to have an idea that is mind blowing, that is going to be great, and I'm excited about. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, no. So in the beginning, I used to want to do it all. I would let's do it to find a way. But as the business began to grow and we began to have, just all these different expenses, we then had to start rethinking that. One of the very difficult, I haven't actually said this publicly, but one of the very difficult decisions I had to make that 2 months ago. And I struggled with it. But then the reality of it was that if you want to continue to swim, you're going to have to make certain decisions. And it felt like we were drowning at some point. And so the accounting in me makes me a realist. We have to be realistic about things. And also my finance people, even before they come for the interview, they'll be like, oh, I know you have they actually bring it up in the interview that, I know you have an accounting background. So it keeps everybody on their toes really in terms of managing funds. And my team know that before they bring anything to me now, they have gotten various options first before, they bring it. So that background is not just for me, for people around me, it's great.
Before we go, I don't know, maybe I should try again and get you in trouble.
Yeah.
What's your take on the whole drama in Benin City Museum of West
You
African
really
Art.
want you really want to get me in trouble.
So, like, what's
You
your
really
perhaps
want to get me in trouble.
a less, because I mean, I've discovered that people really, really have strong opinions more than I realize. Perhaps you have a less politically charged take.
So I have different biases, right? Biases because I come from a royal background, and one of the research I've been doing is around the decline of monarchy authority in Nigeria. And so spending a lot of time understanding how like the constitution played a role in that, how what was once supposed to be this sort of political authority is now just symbolic, right? And so I lived through some of those changes because of my background. And it was very sort of disappointing to see, or just how you have to negotiate being this sort of leader and then also knowing that you have no sort of real power, so to say. We don't really know the context of like the inner workings of what was going on, but I do remember that when I did Venice in 2017, Governor Baseki was the commissioner of the pavilion then. And so he was really interested in the arts. And for me, that made me really happy because, we struggle a lot. For the first Nigerian pavilion to be in 2017, it was just kind of ridiculous. It should have happened sooner. I always say when you have leaders that understand the arts, like it's great, like we love it, we want it. And so what transpired between when it was supposed to be the Royal Museum to what sort of happened now is really unfortunate, right? And I think it doesn't just affect what they're doing, it affects everybody, regardless of whether you're in arts or not. Like it affects the confidence of wanting to do business or wanting to build in Nigeria. So my political view is really, or my non-political view rather, is really that at the end of the day, this is a beautiful institution. Like I haven't been, I've seen the pictures. It looks very well.
It looks amazing. I mean, it looks
Yeah,
really amazing, which is a shame, really. Yeah.
it is a shame. Called it a global embarrassment. I had international people like reaching out to me and saying all these things, right? So my hope is really that all the parties can align, the private people that are working on it, the Oba, the governor. I really hope that they can align. It might take time. And so I say take time, take all the time in it because this institution is going to be here forever, right? So take all the time we need. Don't rush anything. And once you align, everything will be beautiful. So that's my take.
One last question. So you're doing a PhD. What's the
Yeah.
what's your I mean, I don't know who sent you on that, but anyway.
You're
Yeah.
not the first person to say that, by the way.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
heard that so many times.
Adding this to everything else, but okay. What's your research about? What are you hoping to get out of this? At the end of this PhD, when you're Dr. Sonariwo, what do you hope to be doing?
I mean, when I applied to the program, I was really interested in institutions, building institutions on the continent. We spoke about that earlier, about being that validating institution on the continent. And so that's what I'm really, really interested in. And I think that that's what MOA does, for instance. So that's why I'm a bit like, it needs to work. Let everyone align. But then as I start with my seminars and things like that, like there's just so much. So my mind is like going really wild on what I eventually want to do. But it's still very much within the institutional space. I'm very interested in materiality. And so my first research project was about Royal Regalia, which is very personal to me, and then the politics of it as well. I think what I'm really excited about is just this idea of doing research because I'm also, not that I couldn't have done it like without a PhD, but then you have a structured environment where you're accountable for certain things. I've lived without accountability for the last 10 years, right? And so being able to be accountable to someone else, I think is really sort of useful for me. And as I said, I love research. I'm loving the research. I feel like I lost that side of me just going into business for the last 10 years. And so because I also have very real life practical experience, it's different from me going into that. I'm not just writing based on theory. I'm able to bring that sort of experience that I have. And I think it's a very great combination when you bring the practical and the theory together. But I do have some plans. I'll share with you outside of the podcast.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to a couple of
Thank you.
admirals like us. And hopefully, I think this will be very useful for someone. Maybe we'll bring you back again in a year or 2 years' time, or when you finally. Did they
You
toss
can bring me
hats
back
for
after
PhD?
the pitch.
Yeah, that'll be
Yeah.
fun, and then we can talk more. Then. Anyway, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you.